On the evening of February 20th, 1885, at the unusual hour of 10 o'clock, the then controversial American artist James McNeill Whistler stepped onto the stage at Prince's Hall, Piccadilly, in London, to deliver a lecture. Thereafter known by the simple title, The 10 O'Clock, the lecture would capture the imagination of art lovers not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe and America, and would raise issues concerning the role and merit of art that would be debated throughout the cultural world to this day. Contemporary reports suggest that Whistler appeared nervous at first, but soon hit his stride, growing in confidence throughout the evening until by lecture's end he had completely won over the crowd, which included artists, critics, friends and family of Whistler's, and members of fashionable London society. One noteworthy audience member was Oscar Wilde. Although he and Whistler had been friends, their friendship had come under recent strain for reasons that will become clear. Some of the lecture appeared aimed directly at Wilde and other critics in a polemical spirit entirely characteristic of the combative Whistler. In fact, if there are any art critics here tonight, be prepared to duck. Other passages from the lecture soar with poetic language hardly less beautiful than the artist's masterworks themselves. Tonight's presentation includes an abridged delivery of the 10 o'clock, punctuated and leavened by imagined dialogue between the artist and a spirited musician from our time, and illustrated by performances of music and poetry. The majority of the music is by the French composer Claude Debussy, who became a good friend of Whistler's in the latter's many visits to Paris, and who was among those captivated by the published version of the 10 o'clock. Both artist and composer were profoundly influenced by symbolism, a poetic movement inspired by the poetry of Charles Baudelaire and led by Stephane Mallarmé, Whistler's closest Parisian friend. It was at Mallarmé's home that Whistler and Debussy first made their acquaintance, and in the cafes of Paris that their friendship deepened and that many of Whistler's ideas about art took shape. And now, please welcome to the stage, Mr. James Whistler.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great hesitation and much misgiving that I appear before you in the character of the preacher. If timidity be at all allied to the virtue, modesty, and can find favor in your eyes, I pray you, for the sake of that virtue, accord me your utmost indulgence. Art is upon the town, to be chucked under the chin by the passing gallant, to be enticed within the gates of the householder as proof of culture and refinement. If familiarity can breed contempt, certainly art, or what is currently taken for it, has been brought to its lowest stage of intimacy. The people have been told how they shall love art and live with it, until roused at last they resent such intrusion and cast forth the false prophets who have brought the very name of the beautiful into disrepute. Alas, ladies and gentlemen, art has been maligned. She is a goddess of dainty thought, reticent of habit, proposing in no way to better others. She is withal selfishly occupied with her own perfection only, having no desire to teach, seeking and finding the beautiful in all conditions and in all times, as did a high priest, Rembrandt, as did the Venetians, as did Velázquez, whose infants clad in inesthetic hoops are, as works of art, of the same quality as the Parthenon marbles. No reformers were these great men, no improvers of the ways of others. Their productions alone were their occupation, filled with the poetry of their science. Their world was completely severed from that of their fellow creatures, with whom sentiment is mistaken for poetry, and for whom there is no perfect work that shall not be explained by the benefit conferred upon themselves. Humanity takes the place of arts, and God's creations are excused by their usefulness. Beauty is confounded with virtue, and before a work of art it is asked, what good shall it do? Hence, it is that nobility of action in this life which is hopelessly linked with the merit of the work and portrays it. And thus the people have acquired the habit of not looking at the picture, but through it, at some human fact that shall or shall not, from a social point of view, better their mental or moral status.
Excuse me.
What?
Mr. Whistler, may I interrupt you, sir?
Methinks it a bit late to ask.
Well, methinks that if you continue your lecture in such ornate Victorian language, you will risk losing your 21st century audience.
My what?
Yes, I am a young and aspiring musician. Okay, not so young. But still aspiring. I come from the year 2019, returning in this company of art lovers from my time to your groundbreaking 10 o'clock lecture to grapple and engage with it and with you. And please understand me, the substance of what you are saying is as relevant in my time as it was in yours, more than merely the well-known phrase, art for art's sake. You spoke in praise of every kind of beauty for beauty's sake, utterly independent of usefulness or virtue, and you said so much more. But this company here and now, back in your homeland, belongs to an age when eloquent 19th century language alone can sound remote and abstract. We need context. Your magnificent 10 o'clock lecture was a manifesto, not just on behalf of the visual arts, but on behalf of artistic experience itself. Poetry, music. Wouldn't your lovely words come alive if we had examples of these before us along the way to illuminate your meaning, rather like flashes of lightning? We have at our disposal right now, as we speak, this gorgeous Steinway piano. Surely you recall the words of the critic Walter Pater. All art constantly aspires towards the condition of music. With your blessing, I will play a few works of your old friend, Monsieur Claude Debussy, to illustrate your lecture in sound, color, and imagery. And perhaps Charles Baudelaire and the symbolist poets will have a word or two to add as well.
Well, this is all a bit much. I mean, one moment I'm awakened from some kind of a dream to deliver an old lecture next to a stranger who's calling my language remote and abstract. You wrestle me before I've even had a chance to stretch. But I suppose if you've conjured me back to the living, it would be rude to be anything but grateful. The silence of the grave does wear a bit thin. Oh, the dream can be lovely, but lively it is not. My ears could do with a bit of music. There were too many words in that lecture. My voice would welcome a rest now and again after a century of inactivity. Very well then, my good young man, my good man, but I have to ask, How is this possible?
I haven't the faintest idea.
Well, to the music then.
Excellent. Let me start with the work most responsible for initiating in me a dialogue between music and art. It's from Debussy's first set of images, or images, for solo piano, and it's entitled Reflets dans l'eau, or Reflections in the Water. It will honor your collection of watercolors on exhibit just a few steps away in galleries 10 and 11. Water and color in sound. Now, I was first drawn to your art because of the way you gave your pictures musical titles, harmonies, nocturnes, arrangements, and even symphonies. You listen to your paintings. But to the chase, do you also see the music that you hear?
Well, go on.
Well, I was unable to see music myself until I heard the following piece of Debussy. As a boy, I was listening to Reflections in the Water, and I swear to you, at one point I could see sunlight glistening in the rippling water. Where to start? Listen first to the marvelous combinations of sounds through the use of the pedal. Debussy is liquefying the sound. Listen to this very simple tune that Debussy plants like a modest seed. Then watch and listen as that seed gives rise to splendid blooms throughout the piece. And later. But listen above all to the iridescent colors suggested by strange and beguiling harmonies never before heard together. But I will not demonstrate for you the moment I first saw music. Let's see if you see music somewhere in the piece. Claude Debussy's Reflets dans l'eau, Reflections in the Water.
Well, I don't know if I saw anything. But you mentioned the symbolist poet. I was reminded, as you were playing, the playing of Charles Baudelaire's poem, The Blending of the Senses, Correspondence. Nature is a temple whose living colonnades breathe forth a mystic speech in fitful sighs. Man wanders among symbols in those glades where all things watch him with familiar eyes. Like dwindling echoes gathered far away into a deep and thronging unison, huge as the night or as the light of day, all secrets and sounds and colors meet at once. Perfumes there are as sweet as the oboe sound, green as the prairies, fresh as the child's caress, and there are others, rich, corrupt, profound, and of an infinite pervasiveness, like myrrh or musk or amber that excite the ecstasies of sense, the soul's delight.
Oh, yes. Synesthesia, the co-mingling of the senses. Oh, a perfume is a sound, is a touch, is a color.
It's all starting to come back to me. What a time we had as the new century approached. Poets, artists, musicians, borrowing each other's passports to ecstasy. I mean, so much cross-wiring and cross-pollinating in coffee and tobacco-fueled conversations. I mean, what did Pater say? To burn always with this hard gem-like flame. To maintain this ecstasy is success in life. The arts could interpenetrate so exquisitely that sex itself almost seemed redundant.
That hardly slowed you down.
I did say almost.
Fair enough.
And to create pathways to this ecstasy, for that we printed, composed music, wrote poetry.
Baudelaire's line, all secrets and sounds and colors meet as one, calls to mind another line from his poem Harmonie du Soir, or Evening Harmony. Sounds and scents turn in the evening air. Debussy so loved that line that he made it the title of one of his most beautiful preludes. But let's hear some of the poem first. Evening Harmony by Charles Baudelaire. Now is the time
when trembling on its stem, each flower fades away like innocence. Sounds and scents. Sounds and scents turn in the evening air, a melancholy waltz, a soft and giddy dizziness. Each flower fades away like incense. The violin thrills like a tortured heart. A melancholy waltz of soft and giddy dizziness. The sky is sad and beautiful, like some great resting place.
Debussy may well have had such poetry in mind when he said, "There is no theory. You have only to listen. Pleasure is the law."
Pleasure is the law. I used to steady myself on that law when contemplating a second pint at the local pub. How I loved young Debussy. So fearless.
Exactly. And he went on to say, "I love music passionately. And because I love it, I try to free it from barren traditions that stifle it. It is a free art gushing forth, an open-air art, boundless as the elements, the wind, the sky, the sea. It must never be shut in and become an academic art." And by thus thumbing his nose at stuffy tradition, not at all tradition, mind you, he created something both beautiful and revolutionary, so that even in the year 2019, We recognize his musical voice within just a few notes, all the while hearing his influence in the music of virtually every composer who came after him. To the music then, and Debussy's own composition of synesthetic experience. Les sons et les parfums tournent dans l'air du soir, sounds and scents turn in the evening air. Well, thank you, Mr. Whistler. Remember what you said just before I interrupted you. The people have acquired the habit of looking not at a picture, but through it. This has a corollary in music, and it touches directly on Debussy's genius for harmony. If I play a dissonant chord, say a dominant seventh chord, as we say in music talk, we hear it pull, so to speak, toward resolution to what we call the tonic chord. So take these chords from another prelude, La Cathédrale Engloutie. Each of those chords could have been resolved in the way our ears have been conditioned to expect. Wait, a funny story about the great composer Mozart. A friend snuck into the composer's apartment early one morning while Mozart was still asleep and played a loud dominant seventh chord, just like each of the chords in that sequence. Wanting to tease his friend Wolfgang, he did not resolve the chord. So he waited. Soon he heard a fidgeting from Mozart's room, and the composer emerged in his nightdress, headed straight to the piano, and resolved the chord loudly. And then headed right back to bed. He simply could not relax and fall back to sleep until the dissonance was resolved. So we could say that Mozart listened through the dissonance in his imagination to where the chord wanted to go, to its gravitational pull. Now, this is no knock on Mozart, one of the greatest geniuses of all time, musical or otherwise. The world of music was not ready to leap beyond his understanding of dissonance. There was still too much to say with it. But it took the genius of a Debussy more than a century later to set music free from this gravitational pull. He insisted that we listen to a chord's harmony instead of through it to where it leads. That we listen to a dissonance and find beauty therein instead of longing, or worse, merely waiting for it to be resolved. Back to Debussy's chords as he wrote them. Notice how he rubs our noses in these delightful dissonances with nary a resolution anywhere in sight. He persuades us to stop expecting resolution and ultimately to hear the chords not as dissonances at all. He wrote, "There's no need for music to make people think. It would be enough if music could make people listen. If they felt that for a moment they had been dreaming of an imaginary country, that is to say, one that can't be found on the map." And this prelude, La Cathédrale Engloutie, is literally that. It concerns a mythical city called Is, Y-S. There are many versions of the story, but in all of them, Is is inundated by a flood of biblical proportions and its cathedral submerged. The cathedral rises periodically in a magnificent display of solemn power. At the beginning of the piece, you will feel that you are underwater. Listen and see if you can hear the bells tolling noon, the gradual rising of the cathedral in one of the most thrilling crescendos ever composed, and the climactic moment of the cathedral's full and awesome emergence. La Cathédrale Engloutie. And yet another...
Sir!
Yes?
Excuse me. I believe my voice has rested quite enough to continue my lecture. With your blessing, of course.
Touché. Please carry on.
A favorite faith, dear to those who teach, is that certain periods were especially artistic and that nations readily named were notably lovers of art. Listen, there never was an artistic period. There never was an art-loving nation. In the beginning, man went forth each day, some to do battle, some to the chase, others again to dig and delve in the field, all that they might gain and live or lose and die, until there was found among them one differing from the rest, whose pursuits attracted him not. And so he stayed by the tents with the women and traced strange devices with a burnt stick upon the gourd. This man, this designer of quaint patterns, this deviser of the beautiful, who perceived in nature about him curious curvings, as faces are seen in the fire, this dreamer apart was the first artist. And when from the field and from afar there came back the people who took the gourd and drank out of it, and presently there came to this man another, and in time others of like nature, chosen by the gods, and presently they went beyond the slovenly suggestion of nature, and the first vase was born in beautiful proportion.
Yes, wait.
Look, my young friend, I let you hold court for 20 minutes. Is this my lecture or yours?
Sorry.
And time brought more capacity for luxury. And it became that men should dwell in large houses and eat at tables, whereupon the artist with his artificers built palaces and filled them with furniture beautiful in proportion and lovely to look upon. And the people lived in marvels of art and ate and drank out of masterpieces, for there was nothing else to eat and drink out of, and no bad buildings to live in. So Greece was its splendor, and art reigned supreme by force of fact, not by election. And there was no meddling from the outsider. The mighty warrior would no more have ventured to offer a design for the temple of Palais Athena than would the sacred poet have proffered a plan of constructing the catapult. And the customs of cultivation covered the face of the earth, so that all peoples continued to use what the artist alone produced. And centuries passed in this using, and the world was flooded with all that was beautiful, until there arose a new class who discovered the cheap and foresaw fortune in the manufacture of the sham. Then sprang into existence the tawdry, the common, the gewgaw, the taste of tradesmen supplanting the science of the artist. And the artist's occupation was gone. And the manufacturer and the huckster took his place, and art was relegated to the curiosity shop.
Please, sir, shall we visit that shop and rescue one of those beautiful objects? Debussy actually painted in sound the exquisite proportions of that first vase. Vase. He entitled it Canope, French for canopic jar or ancient Egyptian vase. But what did you say just before that bit about the vase? The slovenly suggestion of nature? I hope you weren't planning to leave it at that.
Of course not. Nature contains the elements of color and form of all pictures, as the keyboard contains the notes of all music. But the artist is born to pick and choose and group with science these elements that the result may be beautiful, as the musician gathers his notes and forms his chords until he brings forth from chaos glorious harmony.
From chaos, glorious harmony.
That nature is always right is an assertion artistically untrue, as it is one whose truth is universally taken for granted. Nature is very rarely right, to such an extent even that it might almost be said that nature is usually wrong. That is to say, the condition of things that shall bring about the perfection of harmony worthy a picture is rare and not common at all. The sun blazes, and the wind blows from the east, the sky is bereft of cloud, and without, all is made of iron. The windows of the Crystal Palace are seen from all points of London. The holiday maker rejoices in the glorious day, and the painter turns aside to shut his eyes. And the painter turns aside, as I said, to shut his eyes. Well, how little this is understood, and how dutifully casual in nature is accepted as sublime, and may be gathered from the unlimited admiration daily produced by a very foolish sunset.
Oh, the sunset, please. Now, I know you were always a feisty one, eager for a fight, but really? Can you find no opponent more worthy of your wit than the sunset?
Perhaps that was a bit strong.
Valiant hero defeats sunset in a stunning display of courage.
All right, that's enough. Or you shall have more than my wit to deal with. I have a great deal more to say about nature, I assure you, if you will just...
Let us hear from Debussy on the subject of nature.
Hold your landscapes right there. I was just getting to the good part. Well, trust me, the tide is about to turn as I continue my lecture. The dignity of the snow-capped mountain is lost in distinctness, but the joy of the tourist is it recognizes the traveler on the top. The desire to see for the sake of seeing is, with the mass alone, the one to be gratified. Hence the delight in detail. And when the evening mist clothes the riverside with poetry, as with a veil, and the poor buildings lose themselves in the dim sky, and the tall chimneys become campanelli, and the warehouses are palaces in the night, and the whole city hangs in the heavens, and fairyland is before us, then the wayfarer hastens home. The working man and the cultured one, the wise man and the one of pleasure, cease to understand as they have ceased to see. And nature, who for once has sung in tune, sings her exquisite song to the artist alone. Her son and her master, in that he loves her, and her master, in that he knows her.
Oh, that was good. Now, on this subject of evening mist, so iconic of London, I know your relationship with Oscar Wilde was, shall we say, complicated? But I trust you know what he said about that mist? Oh, I know, he was stealing some of your ideas. Or so you thought. Oh, go ahead. You're in one of your feisty moods. I know you want to tell the story.
Well, I must say it was one of my better retorts. I mean, after I said something pithy or witty, I don't remember what, Oscar said, "I wish I had said that." I shot back, "Oh, you will, Oscar, you will." How I loved a good duel of wits. You know, I came to sign my paintings with a butterfly crafted by my initials. But it was my love of the dueller's strike that gave that butterfly the stinging tail.
Oh, come on, let's get real. You know Wilde was a passionate admirer of yours.
You conjure me up to deliver a 130-year-old lecture, and you tell me to get real?
He was 20 years younger than you, and he wanted your approval.
Huh.
He even once observed that no one saw the mist in London until you painted it. The finest compliment he could have given you. The art of evocation. And Debussy was just as good at it. He gave musical voice to this evening mist in one of his most subtle preludes, entitled Brouillard, Mists. And you alluded to the power of a veil to evoke the poetic. Debussy was the first to fully utilize the most mysterious of musical scales, the whole tone scale, to evoke the poetic. In a prelude he entitled Voile, or Veils. The whole tone scale is a scale without geography, without home base or tonic. There are no half steps mixed into the structure of the scale to give it that geographical home. Take this ordinary C major scale. You know where it leads and where it ends because of its half steps. Right here and right here. But the whole tone scale has no half steps. It leads nowhere, and it never ends. It's as if one steps onto a musical circle and one never knows where to step off. Now, when I play voile, see if you can hear the moment when Debussy does step off the circle and leaves the mystery of the whole tone scale briefly for the serenity and luminosity of the pentatonic scale. Yes, like you, Debussy was also captivated by the Far East and its sound poetry and color. After this work of Debussy, we'll take our lecture break, and perhaps these lovely people can enjoy your watercolors in galleries 10 and 11 before we resume. Voile.
Just before our break, you played Debussy's Veils, and it got me to thinking. I hate to admit it when a critic is right, but maybe old Pater had a point about all art tending toward music. Sounds like a paradox. But Debussy's music makes me itch to paint again. Maybe there really are too many words in this lecture.
No. You were just hitting your stride. You had just given us the loveliest paragraph about the mist and the poetry of the veil. Nature was singing her exquisite song to the artist alone. Please, carry on.
Very well. But I'm finding the music of my old friend quite a tonic. And the bit about the whole tone scale was interesting. I'll continue my lecture. But first, play us another piece that shows us again how the young firebrand was taking harmony in new directions.
With pleasure. You've spoken in praise tonight of ancient Greece. How about a piece that honors her grace in sound and motion? A prelude entitled Danseuses de Delphes, Delphic Dancers.
The muse sang to Debussy. It's just as I said in my lecture. To him her secrets are unfolded. To him her lessons have become gradually clear. The artist looks at nature's flower not with the enlarged lens, that he may gather facts for the botanist, but with the light of the one who sees in her choice selection of brilliant tones and delicate tints suggestions of future harmonies. He does not confine himself to purposeless copying without thought. Each blade of grass is commended by the inconsequential. But in the long curve of the narrow leaf, corrected by the straight, tall stem, he learns how grace is wedded to dignity, how strength enhances sweetness, and that elegance shall be the result. In all that is dainty and lovable, he finds hints for his own combinations, and thus is nature ever his resource and always at his service, and to him is naught refused.
So nature is the resource, but needs the artist to achieve ultimate refinement. Mm-hmm. Debussy had an even more elevated view of nature. He wrote, "I have made mysterious nature my religion. When I gaze at a sunset sky and spend hours contemplating its marvelous, ever-changing beauty, an extraordinary emotion overwhelms me. Nature in all its vastness is truthfully reflected in my sincere, though feeble, soul. Around me are the trees stretching up their branches to the skies, the perfumed flowers gladdening the meadow, the gentle grass-carpeted earth. And my hands unconsciously assume an attitude of adoration, to feel the supreme and moving beauty of the spectacle to which nature invites her ephemeral guests. That is what I call prayer."
My mother was very pious, but I don't know if I ever experienced true prayer. Perhaps the closest I came was putting paint to canvas and creating, as best I could, those pathways to the ecstatic. It's right there in my lecture. Through the artist's brain is distilled the refined essence of that thought which began with the gods and which they left him to carry out. So, apart by them to complete their works, he produced that wondrous thing called the masterpiece, which surpasses in perfection all that they have contrived in what is called nature, and the gods stand by and marvel and perceive how far away more beautiful is the Venus de Milo than was their own Eve.
Prayer as artistic co-creation with the gods. Oh, Mr. Whistler, you do make me long for a less ironic, less distracted time. In my own, nature is more likely to end up a meme or a post or a texted photo than an imprint on the soul. Oh, I know you have no idea what those things are. Not worth explaining. But we spend so much time looking at our screens that we hardly ever take a moment to look at a flower.
Screens? Are they some kind of new canvas?
Sadly, no. Suffice to say that a screen is what I might consult to see what kind of day it is outside instead of actually stepping outside for a few breaths of fresh air. Our collective failure to value nature's beauty the way your artistic generation did has put us at risk of losing it. Did you know the Buddha once preached an entire sermon wordlessly, just by holding up a flower? Let us gaze at this heather with Debussy as our guide. But first, how about a poem by your friend and Debussy's, Stephane Mallarmé? You knew him and his poetry well. Do you know The Flowers?
Do I remember? I was thinking of Mallarmé's line, young gladioli with the necks of swans, when I wrote about grace being wedded to dignity. The Flowers by Stephane Mallarmé. For golden showers of the ancient skies, on the first day and the eternal snow of stars, you once unfastened giant calyxes for the young earth still innocent of scars. Young gladioli with the necks of swans, laurels divine of exiled souls the dream, vermilion as the modesty of dawns trod by the footsteps of the seraphim. The Hasith, myrtle gleaming bright, and like the flesh of women the cruel rose, red-eyed, blooming in the garden light, that she from wild and radiant blood arose.
According to an insightful critic from my time, Mallarmé sensed a kinship of technique between symbolist poetry like that and your art. The deliberate blurring of precise outlines so as to enable the imagination to perceive what is real and true. Sounds like he understood Debussy's use of the pedal. So here's the composer's flower prelude. Bruyère. Heather.
You mentioned an insightful critic of your time. This brings me back to my lecture with a bit of a thud. I am no fan of critics, as the next passages make clear.
Oh, you're hardly alone in that. Debussy wrote, "I wish to write down my musical dreams in a spirit of utter self-detachment. I wish to sing of my interior visions with the naive candor of a child." No doubt this simple musical grammar will jar on some people. It is bound to offend the partisans of deceit and artifice. I foresee that and rejoice at it. Your turn to rejoice.
Well, for some time past, the unattached writer has become the middleman in this matter of art. And his influence has brought about the most complete misunderstanding as to the aim of the picture. Apart from a few technical terms for the display of which he finds an occasion, the work is considered absolutely from a literary point of view, a novel, a history, or an anecdote. He fails entirely, and most naturally, to see the excellencies or demerits artistic, and so degrades art as supposing it a method of bringing about literary climax. Meanwhile, the painter's poetry is quite lost to him. The amazing invention that shall have put form and colour into such perfect harmony, that exquisiteness is the result. And his myth, and without understanding the nobility of thought that shall have given the artist's dignity to the whole, says to him absolutely nothing. Art happens. No hovel is safe from it. No prince may depend upon it. The vastness, intelligence cannot bring it about, and puny efforts to make it universal end in quaint comedy and coarse farce. While the artist, in fullness of heart and head, is glad and laughs loud and is happy in his strength and is merry at the pompous pretension of the solemn silliness that surrounds him, for art and joy, they go together with bold openness and high head and ready hand, fearing naught and dreading no exposure.
The artist laughs. How refreshing! Joy and laughter are too often missing from the classical music world. We take ourselves so seriously sometimes. What's the old saying? Angels fly because they take themselves lightly. And the artist who takes himself seriously is earthbound as an ostrich. But how rare the work itself that laughs. And that leads us to our next great composer, the one who inherited from Debussy upon his death the mantle of greatest living French composer. He was influenced profoundly by Debussy's freeing of music from the stuffy halls of academe, and what 20th century composer wasn't, after all. But his voice was every bit as distinctive as that of Debussy. His name was Maurice Ravel. 13 years Debussy's junior. As with yourself and Debussy, the establishment held Ravel in suspicion and took far too long to recognize his genius. The next time you feel your ego bruised by critics like John Ruskin, consider that Ravel tried 5 times to win the coveted Prix de Rome from the professors at the Paris Conservatory, among competition entirely forgotten today. And he failed every time. So here is a work of Ravel that positively laughs out loud, and it's the purest joy to play. It is that rare piece of music that reminds us that we play the piano, we don't work the piano. The title is Jeux d'eau, words that are hard to translate from French. Literally, they mean games of water, but they can also suggest fountains and waterfalls. Ravel begins with an epigram from the symbolist poet Henri de Régnier. Régnier writes, "River god laughing as the water tickles him." More synesthesia. We have seen music tonight, and now we feel it against our very skin. Mr. Whistler, I've said that virtually every composer who followed Debussy was indebted to him in some way. So let me play for you more of the music from the century that followed yours, so rich in diversity and creativity, so that you can hear Debussy's influence for yourself. And if the Buddha can allow a flower to give a sermon without a word, surely we can let a few works of music speak entirely for themselves. I will leave it to you and our listeners to forge connections between Debussy's music and the works you are about to hear. Stravinsky Larghetto, Bill Evans, Perry's Scope, and George Crumb, Love Death Music. As timeless as that music is, we still abide by the clock, and it is getting late. One last piece?
Mm-hmm.
You know, both you and Debussy found inspiration from the Far East, from the paintings of Hokusai, to the gamelan of Java, to the pagodas of Japan. And right next to galleries 10 and 11, where your watercolors are displayed here, is your magnificent peacock room with all of those priceless Chinese vases. So here is a work from Debussy's set of musical engravings, Estampes, his evocation of Japanese pagodas, entitled simply Pagode. May I ask you, Mr. Whistler, to read us the final paragraphs of your 10 o'clock lecture, after which I will end our evening with Debussy's Pagode.
The master stands in no relation to the moment at which he occurs. A monument of isolation, hinting at sadness, having no part in the progress of his fellow men. He is also no more the product of civilization than is the scientific truth asserted, dependent upon the wisdom of a period. The assertion itself requires the man to make it. The truth was there from the beginning. So art is limited to the infinite, and beginning there cannot be progress. False again is the fabled link between the grandeur of art and the glories and virtues of the state. For art feeds not upon nations, and peoples may be wiped from the face of the earth, but art is. We have but to wait until, with the mask of the gods upon him, there comes among us again the chosen, who shall continue with what has gone on before, satisfied that even were he never to appear, the story of the beautiful is already complete, hewn in the marbles of the Parthenon, and embroidered with the birds upon the fan of Hokusai at the foot of Fujiyama. Now hold on. I have a couple of Debussy notes and quotes for you. Works of art make rules. Rules do not make works of art. I can't tell you how often that gave me courage to break a rule or two. And you, my friend, the aspiring musician, don't forget the root of the word, aspiring. Don't forget to let the music breathe. For as Debussy said, music is the space between the notes.
Sir, may I call you Jimmy? I've tested your patience more than once tonight. You've been so gracious in allowing me to engage with you and your lecture. Your pathways to ecstasy are about much more than art for art's sake, much more even than looking at a picture rather than through it. You and Monsieur Debussy and the symbolists show us that the entire world can be our threshold to ecstasy.
And I have to ask, what happens to me now?
My friend Jimmy, I haven't the faintest idea. Perhaps it's back to the dream. But before you go, I want you to take something with you from this evening. Close your eyes and rest. You gave the world an extraordinary gift. Over 2,700 works of art, many of them masterpieces. Perhaps we can give something back to you every time we look at your works of art instead of through them. With every sensation of pleasure, imagination, inspiration, awe, wonder, that your arrangements in shape and color and line evoke in us. Feel our pleasure like the vibrations of a soft and distant music. Be very still.
Oh my, that is beautiful. Yes, yes.